Hello, hello. So, the Lord gave me a big revelation this morning, okay? And it made a lot of sense. So, I don't know if you can all remember, but I sure can. But not too long ago, I'd say maybe just before COVID, like 5 years ish ago, 5, 10 years, somewhere in there, there was a. Sorry, forgive me. Anytime I start to talk, devil tries to take my voice. I'm fine before camera and after camera, just when I'm on camera, of course, speaking. I rebuke you, Satan, in the name of Jesus, as usual. Okay, so if you can recall, there was a lot of talk and conversation in the media back then about population growth and how they were so concerned about it, to the point that they were even, and they're still trying to do this, by the way. I just got a reminder of this the other day, where there's like, I don't know how true it is or the validity of the post or the article, but there's this girl that's getting prepared to go try life on Mars and see if it's habitable and things like this. So they're trying to come up with alternative solutions to deal with the population growth, because up until around 15 years ago ish, we had a huge surge in population growth, where it's always been, the Lord has it comparable, of course, where for every person that dies, someone's born, and for every person that's born, someone dies, right? Because obviously, if everyone dies, then what? And if everyone's born, like if we have so many births, then what, right? So the Lord knows what he's doing. Now, man likes to control things, and over the last 20 years, we've seen where the Lord has allowed and authorized man to control certain things, or so he believes or thinks, right? And so because of that, he advances further and further into thinking and creating all the different things he can control. As like we see how they're trying to create robots, and how they're trying to create artificial wombs where they're able to make babies and incubate babies without women, like sex changes. We're seeing all kinds of ways that man is trying to play God, right? But that's because God has allowed man, given man enough slack to move in this fashion. Because if God wants to shut it down, he will shut it down, right? So because of that, they've compared the data in the past and seen that the amount of births were outweighing the amount of deaths to a certain degree, and they were concerned that if for every, say, billion babies born every year, there's only a 500 million people dying. Well, give it a projective rate of 10, 20 years, and what does that look like then, right? So even though God is in control of the population decreasing or increasing, man starts to worry about disease and famine and all this different stuff if the population exceeds too strongly, right? So as we know, because we're Christians, we believe in God. God controls everything, right? Including man. But for those that are in the world that don't believe in God, which a lot of people don't, let's be honest, they believe in science. And so therefore they think, but God created human to create science. You know what I'm saying? But they don't believe in God. They believe in science. So therefore they just go off of statistics, data, formulas, things like this. And because of that, they see that, oh, due to our calculations, this could happen and this could happen. And they're mostly just concerned about themselves, right? They're concerned about the planet. It's no different than our works on trying to stop pollution. But because we're not God, we're limited. So you literally have man on this side trying to stop pollution because of the holes in the ozone layer, and trying to protect the earth, not even just for us today, but for the next 10 generations to come, right? But then meanwhile, at the same time, on the other side of the fence, you have these ones that are all for nuclear factories and things like this, and like going for toxic emissions, and not caring about the carbon footprint we leave behind and things like this. So you literally have two sides of the fence, where one side is like riding their bicycle to work every day and growing their own food and using a composter. And then you have this side that, owns 7 different vehicles, owns a mansion, all kinds of things that are giving off a whole bunch of toxic emissions, right? And so you only have one half that cares about the pollution and the world we're going to leave behind for the rest. And you have another part that does not, okay? The reason why it's like that is because it's up to God. So on a side note, I don't honestly worry too much about the pollution on the planet. I don't contribute to it in a high fashion, but I'm not overly worried about it. I understand that, yes, the science tells us there's these holes in the ozone layer and we're getting closer to the sun and all this. Well, I guess the sun's getting closer to us, however you want to put it. I understand there is all these things, yes. However, because of my faith in God, I know that God knows what he's doing, right? I don't put my faith in man because I know there's things I don't know, and there's things I'm smart in and things I'm not so smart in. And so therefore I know that my fellow man is going to be in the same boat as me for the most part, right? They're going to think the similar things as me and say similar things as me and do similar things as me. So therefore, if I couldn't trust myself in every situation, how could I trust my neighbor? I can't, right? So therefore, because of that, I put my trust in God, and because of that, I know that God has created everything and he knows what he's doing. If we're getting the sun's getting close to us, or however you want to put it, then God's decided that to happen. And if the world starts to melt, then that's God's decision, right? And if it starts to, and God lets it happen for a bit, I have faith and know he's going to come along and stop it in due time before things get too, out of order, right? And so this is the thing. But because man, not all man, but some man doesn't believe in God, they believe in humans. They think like humans created everything and science and all this stuff. They believe in that. So therefore they believe that they can manipulate and just come up with an alternative solution or whatever, and that all it requires is some time, money, and effort, and they can come up with a replacement or an alternative or something, right? But the only reason why they were allowed and allotted to come up with a replacement or an alternative theory or outcome is because the Lord allowed them to. You see what I'm saying? And so anyways, so because of all of that, there was a population growth issue. Now, the Lord wasn't concerned, because if we have a surge in births or a surge in deaths, as I already said, that's the Lord dictating and determining that, right? He knows best for us. So if he's brought a surge of births and a lack of deaths, then that's for a reason. And vice versa, if he brings a surge of deaths and a lack of births, that's also for a reason, right? We don't need man to take care of environmental concerns and issues. It's nice that they're concerned, and I mean, we should be. I'm not saying we shouldn't think it's important, because it is, but we don't need man to create faux wombs, like false wombs, and to replicate the human brain and things like this. God will decide if he wants to make that a thing or not, okay? So we just need to leave everything up to God. So with that being said, God wasn't concerned, man was. Man was very concerned with population control, population growth, all this stuff. But God, if God goes with what man's doing, like coincides with it, then it's because, okay, man thinks that they control everything, as I said, okay? But God actually controls everything. But what God will do is allow man to think that he controls everything, and therefore will give man enough of a, like, it's no different. On a side note, I'll explain. It's no different than with your enemies, right? They've been coming against you in man-made ways. But if God didn't want your enemies to come against you in the first place, he would have shut them down before they started. It wouldn't have even happened. So the fact that your enemies were able to come against you successfully in the past in various man-made ways, the only reason why they were allowed to do it is because God authored and allowed that to happen in the first place. In their brain said, go do this, and their hands went ahead and did it. God allowed their brain to think the thought and led their hands to do the action, okay? This is the thing. There's always a superior being. But because these enemies don't believe in God, they believe in themselves and alternate things like, magic and wicked energy and like falsities and lies and gossip and things like this. So they go and create gossip, lies in a big machine against you, no different than the scientists do. And because it comes across as successful, they believe, they take the credit and think we've cracked the code. No different when the scientists go and create a false womb and they're able to successfully grow a baby from seed to end in this false womb. They take credit for that and say, oh, we're so smart. We've we've outsmarted God, we've outsmarted science, we've done the impossible, we're so great, we're so smart, we're amazing. It was actually God that allowed that human man, like those people, to go ahead and do this, think these thoughts in the first place, and therefore create such things with their hands. God was ahead of them, allowing them to do that. So yes, they did it successfully. They did, and they did rely on their own brain and science to get the outcome they were looking for. But it was God that first and foremost allowed them and gave them the freedom and room to think those thoughts in the first place and act out those actions. Okay? It's just like when man takes another man's life, if God doesn't want that man to be taken out, God will intervene and not allow that to happen. Okay? Somehow, some way, he will thwart their plan. But if God wants, that to happen, it's in God's design that it's time for that person to go, then God will allow that man to take out that other man. Okay? And when that man takes out that other man, they think, oh, see, I can play God. I can decide if someone goes or not. It's up to me to dictate and determine. Not realizing that if that person wanted to go and take out, a whole town of 1,000 people, if it was possible and it happened, it's because God allowed them to do it, right? And God allowed them to do it as part of this population control. Because obviously people have to die. They have to. Not only do they die in the Bible and God talks about death and stuff, that's a part of prophecy. So this is the thing, is man thinks, because they don't believe in God, they think that they are in power and control of who should live and who should die. If they want to create a faux baby in a faux womb and create birth outside of God's normal traditional way, then they can do that if they so please, because there is no God, there's only man, and there's only science. And we can dictate and determine if we want to grow and create 500 babies, 5 babies, 1,000 babies, right? But the only reason why they were allowed to grow 1 baby, 100 babies, 1,000 babies in that alternative method is because God allowed them to do it in the first place. If God didn't want that to happen, it wouldn't have happened. You see? So that now the same thing goes with death. Yes, technically you can control how many people die. Yes, you can. However, God pre-authorized if those people were going to die or not. And so this is the thing that man doesn't understand, is that when man creates life, so a man could think, I'm going to go and impregnate 100 different women and create 100 different babies. If that man successfully impregnates 100 different women and creates 100 different babies, God allowed that man to do that, to go have the thought, to act out, and go create 100 different babies with 100 women, okay? If turn around somewhere else in the world, another man decides, I'm going to go blow up a movie theater, God allows that person to go and do it, okay? Because on scenario A, we've created 100 babies. On scenario B, we've killed 100 people. You see how it has to cancel itself out? God can't just have all births and no deaths, but he also can't have all deaths and no births. So yes, God himself will take somebody out and give birth and life. When a man and a woman come together and, are intimate and she gets pregnant, that's God doing it, yes. But it doesn't just stop there. God has allowed the scientist to extract the egg out of the woman and the sperm from the man and go create a baby in a lab, as they call it, test tube babies. God allowed that scientist to create that and do that in the first place. But because these men and women and scientists don't believe in God, they believe in themselves, therefore they believe in man and science, but the only thing that's created science is man, and God created man. They don't give the credit to God, they give the credit to themselves or other fellow humans. But it was actually God that allowed that. So then it bolsters them even more to think there is no God, because they're like, well, if God was real and God said man and women have to come together intimately and conceive a baby, then why was I able to extract an egg from her and sperm from him and make a baby and grow one in a lab? Because God allowed you to. That's why, So God is still the superior being. And because God will allow life to be created in many different ways and forms, right? But at the end of the day, that creation of life, the fact that you struck the match and it sparked in the first place, God allowed the spark, right? It wasn't you. So this is the thing that people that don't believe in God don't understand is that they haven't created anything. They take credit for it all and think that they are a superior being. Then, like I said, this bolsters their belief that there is no God, because if there was God, then how were they able to successfully play God? How were they able to successfully come up with a strategic plan to basically essentially murder people and get away with it if there's God? I thought that was God's job. How if there's God, are we able to successfully create live and healthy babies in labs? I thought there was God. But they're not understanding that there was God, there is God, and there will always be God. God created man, who created the brain, or God created man and created the brain that created the science that man created that he took credit for. You understand what I'm saying? So why I say this is because what the Lord was showing me is with all that said, is for the last like 15 years, the population, if you look at like past graphs, there's been an equal, for the most part, of, like I said, for every birth there's a death, for every death there's a birth. So there was an equal plotting of births and deaths at the same similar rates, right? Why? Because God knows what he's doing. Whether man is giving birth or killing people off, whether we're being born or we're dying, God is in control and knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing with the birth rates, the death rates. He knows what he's doing with the ozone layer. He knows what he's doing with the planets and the sun. He knows everything, okay? And so, yes, unfortunately, sometimes some people have to get sick. They have to have these freak accidents. They have to get murdered. They have to have, murder was in the Bible. One of the very first murders was Cain taking out Abel. You know what I mean? And so if God didn't, and God talked to Cain after he killed Abel and said, "What did you do, Cain?" You see? And so the point was that, and this is in the early book of Genesis, after God just told us about how he created the world and created man, Adam, and woman, Eve. And then they had children, and their own children, their sons, Cain, took out their other son, Abel. So don't you think that God could have intervened and stepped in and stopped that from happening? He didn't. And it's proved, like, the whole murder thing, man killing man, goes all the way back to the very first book of the Bible. It happened like shortly after God created the world. This happened because of the sin of the Garden of Eden, as we know, right? It brought sin and detriment. God wanted a perfect world, but because of Adam and Eve's sin, he couldn't do that any longer. And so murder and death and pain and all these different things were born and established, right? Because of a consequence. So with that said, that's what happened. And so, yes, unfortunately, I know it's terrible, I agree, but man has to take out man. That's just the way that it is. And so when a man kills another man, God could have stepped in and stopped that if he wanted to, just like when that man was born before he died. Say he was born, and then he lived 35 years and was killed. When that man was first born 35 years ago, when his mom and his dad conceived him, that was God playing God. And then when he died 35 years later, that was God playing God. God decides when we are going to be born and when we're going to die. And this is for all of us, whether we believe in God or not. And so even though man and woman came together and were intimate, that created the baby, that man and woman could foolishly think, well, we created this baby because had we not been intimate, this baby would have never been conceived. So we decided if we never touched each other, we never would have even had this child, right? But this is the thing, is that God gave the man and the woman the thoughts to come together, and therefore their hands led the actions to do so, right? Which then created the baby in the first place, because God decided that it was time for a birth and time for that specific person to be born. This is why I say God makes no mistakes. When it comes to a surge in births or a surge in deaths, for every person that's been born and created, even those born with disabilities and disease, etc., God makes no mistakes. And yes, sometimes a baby will be born with a disease and will pass away from that disease a day or a week later. Yes, that's still God playing God. Man can't do it all. Man can't save. Doctors can't save every person, right? Not every birth is successful. Not every death comes through. There's people that say that they die and go to either hell or heaven, and then they come back. And when they come back, the doctor goes, "I'm so great, I brought a person back from death." No, God did that. So there's a very fine line between man playing God and God playing God. And if man can play God in one way, shape, or form, where they either put their hands into a birth, creating a life, right? Or they put their hands into a death and create a death or stop a death from occurring and bring a death back to life. Either way, A or B, it was God that was the be all, sorry, the be all end all, right? It was God that did that. So with that being said, about the Lord was showing me this morning, was that he was talking to me after I woke up. He was saying population control. And I was like, oh. And so then, sorry, I'm just going to take a drink. So then the Lord led me to go and look this up. So this wasn't me doing my own, I wasn't thinking this at all. This is just what the Lord led me to do, right? To look this up. And now he didn't have me do a whole lot of research. He just wanted to show me something. So I looked it up, and of course it was only showing me rates for Canada because that's where I live. I mean, I could have dug deeper, of course, but typically what happens in the States happens in Canada. What happens in Canada happens in the States for the most part, right? Especially when it comes to something like this. So the Lord was showing me that birth rates have declined since 2009 in Canada, and then showed me this graph where they were at, basically where they were at in 2009, and they plummeted way down, okay? And I was like, wow, like a huge drastic decline. But I also know that in these last 10 years, we've had a lot of deaths, right? There's an uptick in murder, there's an uptick in suicide, there's an uptick in disease, there's an uptick in addiction, there's an uptick in, we had COVID, right? There's an uptick in so many things that can take people out. And then there's subsequent deaths. Like, so for instance, if there's an uptick in addictions, then therefore there's an uptick in people that are driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And therefore subsequently there's an uptick in car accidents, right? You know what I'm saying? So, or even just human injuries where someone's under the influence and they don't realize they're on a high up balcony and they stumble because they are inebriated and they fall to their death, right? So accidental deaths and drownings and things like this. So there's an uptick in all of these things. And so I know that the death rate is either the same or went up, but yet the birth rate has declined drastically, right? Now, what would you say would be one of the reasons that one of the biggest reasons why somebody would not want to get pregnant or have a child in these last, say, 3 to 5 years? What would you say? Well, of course, common sense would say that poverty, right? Everyone is struggling right now. Rent is so high, mortgage is so high, gas prices are high, utility costs are high, groceries are high. Everything is so high that people don't even travel for leisure or do any leisurely activities, therefore, let alone take on the financial burden of a baby. So there's people that would like to have a baby, but choose not to have a baby because of the cost of living. Plus, because the cost of living is up, mom can't stay home with the baby anymore like she could have in the past, right? She needs to now work because people have to have like a 2-income household because of the cost of living. So therefore, even if mom wants to have a baby or another baby, she talks herself out of it because she's like, well, I basically have to push the baby out and a month later be back to work. And then I can't afford the nanny costs and all that stuff to watch my child. And even if I could say swing it, I don't want to because I don't want, a stranger to spend more time with my newborn than I do, right? And so God is saying all of this is intentional. It's all intentional. We already know that them, society, the government, the powers that be, etc., upticking the prices on everything is purposeful. We know that. We know that they are purposely doing it. Yes, they've come up in the past, they've come up with excuses as to why they do this. They don't even bother trying to appease us with excuses anymore. They're just straight up doing it. They're raising the prices on everything. Vehicles, homes, rent, mortgage payments, airfare, medications, clothing, diapers, formula, baby food in general, utilities, you name it. Every single thing has went up, right? And you and I both know that they are purposely increasing these prices. And we have been chalking it up to greed and like corruption, right? Which, don't get me wrong, a lot of it is greed and corruption. That is a huge portion of it, right? But the other portion of it that was the correlating to the revelation that the Lord gave me today is, yes, we're correct. This is intentional. But one of the reasons why it's so intentional is because it's all funnels in to population control. Right? Because if they've raised the cost of living so high, it is going to subsequently stop people or thwart them from having more children. And that is exactly what has happened. They concocted this plan, man did, right, through data and formulation and statistics and such, because man got scared and concerned 10, 20 years ago when there was this boom in birthing and not keeping up to trend with death, that because of the pollution in the ozone layer and all this stuff and our carbon footprint, and for the world we live in today and for our generations to come, man felt like they had to take it upon themselves and put the ball in their own hands, God's ball, take God's ball and put it in their hands, and say, oh man, the data says this, the data says that, I'm so scared, we better do A, B, C, D, E to try to stop population growth, and therefore play God and manipulate and play around and muck around with population control. Because if we keep going where we're going, if say there's mom and dad and they push out 5 kids and they're a 7 people family, well, think of all of the people that are using garbage, and those kids. Now we're going to have 3 of the 5 kids grown up driving vehicles. So now instead of that household putting out 1 or 2 vehicles, now they're going to put out 4 or 5 vehicles because moms, dads, the kids. You see what I'm saying? And now, instead of emissions coming from 1 home or 2 homes, we're going to have 5 homes, then the parents, so like 6 homes on the go, Then we have, once the kids are all grown, now we have 7 people driving to work with gas emissions. You see? So this is what the Lord, I didn't pick this up from man. I didn't come up with this on my own. This is what the Lord was saying, as he was telling me this morning, this major revelation, and it makes so much sense. Is that basically what's happened is that in the last 15 years, but even before that, but specifically, we've been hearing, and we know this is true, in the last, say, 20 years, we've been hearing so much in the background, not so much anymore because they're controlling the population as we speak. This plan they concocted, they have already followed through with it, and they're still following through with it today, and it is working. Nobody is having, because of the high cost of living, nobody's having kids. I keep seeing post after post of women asking where they can get abortions done. They're getting pregnant and they're in marriages. Like, it's literally like it's mom and dad married with 2 kids and she got pregnant by accident. She wants to get an abortion. Not because she doesn't want to have the baby and she's this, that, and the third, but because she cannot afford, they cannot afford to have the child. They literally cannot. They are already taking food out of their mouths, and the 2 kids' mouths they already have, they should be feeding the kids 3 times a day, and they're only feeding the kids once or twice. How are they supposed to afford the astronomical cost that's been tacked onto formula and diapers for the next 2 years? They cannot do it. And then the cost doesn't stop there. That's another life that they have to support through utilities, and maybe they'll have to go from renting to buying a home, then they'll have to put money down, and we know the cost of buying a home these days, plus also supply and demand. You can't, even if you have money in your pocket, you can't necessarily go get a home because they've all been filled up by other immigrants and stuff, other people moving from other countries. And so all of this is all grand design. These are not coincidental things. The fact that all the jobs are taken by immigrants, the fact that all the homes are being occupied by immigrants, the fact that there's mass immigration in the first place, where basically the states in Canada have let down their border control and said, come on in, right? That's not an accidental thing. And we're aware of it. We know that there is corrupt, weird things going on behind the scenes, but we just chalk it up to stupidity, foolishness, greed, corruption, evil, wicked, We chalk it all up to that, and that is correct. Our perceptions are correct. However, it funnels even deeper than that to where we're right, they're doing it intentionally. But one of the biggest first motivators that caused all this was population control. Pollution, ozone layer, all the stuff we were hearing back in the 90s and the early 2000s. If we continued to go how we were going with the astronomical birth rates, and because at that time, men and women were having kids left, right, and center, because back in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you didn't have sex as much outside of marriage. And if you got pregnant through a one-night stand or through on a first date or something, you were considered like an embarrassment to those around you. You shamed yourself, you shamed your family, everything else, right? So it's not that it didn't happen, but it happened less. But then what started to boom and happen in like the 80s, 90s, 2000s is people started to be sexual with everybody. And so there was like this free sex movement where people were having all these like, like one night stands and like, multiple party engagements. I know you know what I'm talking about. We started to see that, and I'm old enough to know this. This isn't me just talking out of the side of my neck. I am old enough that I was alive and well in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and I know what I'm talking about. There was a lot of outrageous behavior, people going to the clubs, drinking, drugging, sexing, all kinds of stuff. And because of that, there was a huge boom in babies, because instead of man finding woman and woman finding man and getting married like they did in the 50s, 60s, 70s and having 2 or 3 or 4 kids, now it was, women with 3 or 4 different baby dads. And man, he was no different. He had 4 or 5 baby moms. And then, right? And so we had this huge surge in population and in birthing. And of course, God knows what he's doing. He knew that was going to happen before it did. And so he had it all under control. Maybe he knew that at that time, the world needed more births. He wanted to populate the earth, right? But he did all that. And it got to a certain point to where we were starting to see a huge uptick in the declining of the ozone layer and like pollution and things like this. And so God said, okay, that's enough. He capped it off. God did. But man, the scientists did all this data and research, and they're like, oh no, what are we gonna do? We've had we used to be on trend where for every 500 births there was 500 deaths, but now there's 1,000 births and 500 deaths. And if we continue at this rate and we keep going this way, and everyone keeps having sex outside of marriage, and there's all these sexual liaisons, pretty soon we're gonna have 5,000 births and 500 deaths. And so man took it upon themselves to concoct and create a world plan. This was the Lord saying world domination. So this isn't just Canada exclusively, the States exclusively, this country exclusively. This is like a worldwide plan, okay? But who it's affecting the most is the first world countries. So Canada, the States, the UK, places like this, okay? This is who they focused on the most. And so there was this behind the scenes, behind closed doors plan that they were going to play God and take the amount of births and the amount of deaths into their own hands. And they were going to basically kill off a bunch of people in various methods and ways so it didn't look obvious. More accidents, more drug addiction, more homicides, more suicides, things like this. And cap off the amount of births that they were going to do. Well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to slow down? You're one human being. How are you going to slow down the birth rate and uptick the death rate? How are you going to do that? Well, I'll tell you how you're going to do that. You're going to raise the cost of living. If you raise the cost of living, it makes the fact that people can go out and party and drink and smoke and do drugs and be under the influence to where they make poor choices because their inhibitions are gone. It lowers the risk of that, which is exactly what's happened. People can't afford to buy groceries for the week, let alone do that type of stuff, right? So it's decreased the amount of one night stands and people just being loose and on the go, right? It also makes it so that, like I said already, people don't want to have kids, whether they're doing it in the right way or not, a God approved way or not. It makes them not want to do it because they can't afford it. And so then you make the world corrupt, which is exactly what we're seeing, and our world is so ugly and terrible that another side note is people don't want to bring a child into this world anyways. Bringing a child into the world 30 years ago was okay, but bringing a child into this world today, when there's so many fears and worries, because part and parcel with that part of the plan, they've also done things to make the world a very terrible, horrible place, so that it lessens your desire to bring a child into the world. Because the chances are good that your child will have autism or some sort of disability or sickness or disease. And if they bypass that one, then someone could kidnap them or hurt them, or they could get addicted to drugs or alcohol one day, or, what if they have depression or mental illness, physical illness, you get it, you see? And so this is what God was telling me that man decided to do. Man got scared of the surge in population in the past, and that, yes, God has always been God, so God knows what he's doing. He has been controlling. Man behind the scenes has been controlling things, but man doesn't realize that actually God behind the scenes has been controlling things that man does. Even men controlling things behind the scenes, God was controlling those men behind the scenes, what they were controlling behind the scenes. There was always a superior being, right? And so God's saying man got scared 15, 20 years ago, and it all correlates. The whole pollution, and we heard about in the past 20, 30 years ago, the fears of where we were heading with the earth, and man started to worry, just like now we're still there. Man's checking out Mars, trying to move people to Mars, all this stuff. If God wants us on other planets, we will be. We don't decide that. And so if we're successfully able to put a woman or whoever on Mars, God allowed us to do that. But if man goes and puts a woman on Mars for a year and she survives and thrives and everything, man's going to take credit for that and say, see, the science told us it was possible. We plotted the data for 10 years and we found out we could do it. It's possible. And because I'm so smart and you're so smart, we were able to create this whole alternative method, right? Not realizing that if that woman made it to Mars, God allowed it. If that woman survived and thrived on Mars, God allowed it. If there is to be life 100 years from now on Mars, God allowed it. The fact that that scientist's brain and IQ was large enough to come up with this in the first place, God allowed it. The fact that this scientific team came together and spent years plotting the data to come up with this, every invention is God. When the fact that people are creating AI and they're creating robots, God's allowing it. This is the thing, is God is allowing all this stuff to happen. And when man creates a robot successfully, then they laugh at God and say, I told you God wasn't real, because if God was real, how are we allowed to make a robot? Because God let you. I told you God wasn't real, because if God was real, then why were we so smart and able to send a woman to Mars? Because God allowed you. You see what I'm saying? And so God is telling me that man years ago went behind the scenes and they all talked together. This is how we knew there was involvement and corruption going on, things that didn't make sense. On the surface, these leaders try to make it look like they hate each other and they don't talk and they're all at odds with each other and all this. No. That's a ploy. That's a facade, the Lord is saying. Hallelujah. That's a ploy and a facade to look a certain way in public. In actuality, they go behind closed doors all the time. And maybe not so much today as they did in the past, but in the past, they came up in the last, 15 years ago-ish, they came up with this plan. So the fact that we saw COVID, yeah, that was part of the plan. There was actually supposed to be even more deaths from COVID than there actually was. They did that intentionally so that to you and me, it looks like it's just a disease that broke out. It's out of any human person's control. How can you help it? No different than the bird flu or SARS or any other thing that they've tried to create over the last 20 years to take people out. This is it's all a plan. The swine flu, the bird flu, the avian flu, all of it, COVID, it's all measles. Now all of a sudden measles is being brought back, right? And they're sitting here trying to say, it's because people won't vaccinate. That's the problem. No, it's because they've released it. They are intentionally releasing these viruses and sicknesses purposely and on purpose so that people catch it and get sick and die. Because they are concerned about because if I'm wrong or crazy, why is that going on? But simultaneously at the same time, they're sending people to Mars and they're researching life on Mars at the same time, because they are, and they make no bones about it. They say, we are concerned about Earth. We are concerned about the world, Earth disintegrating, and we have to work on this today because it's going to take decades for this experimentation and the data and everything to come back. And so we have to get the ball rolling now so that we can save and preserve the planet for the next 100 or 1,000 years, or however long God decides it to be. But what man doesn't understand is God knows what he's doing. And so this is why we're victims of this, is because when we're Christians, we believe in God. And so we know God controls everything, not man. But because there's man on the planet that doesn't believe in God, they think that they control everything. And so we as Christians are kind of betwixt and between. On one hand, we believe in God, but we're forced to dwell and live around man who doesn't believe in God. And so therefore, they're purposely scared and worried about something that they don't need to be scared and worried about. Because if we have had a surge in population, the Lord allowed it. If there's a decline in deaths, the Lord allowed it. The Lord just has to snap his fingers or shuffle his feet, and births will decline and deaths will increase. And this is the other thing the Lord was telling me, is that he has played in with this. Whether these people believe in God or not is irrelevant. God is telling me he's involved in this. So like I said already earlier in the message, so the fact that a man was able to create a test tube baby, God allowed that man to create the test tube baby. And that happened like 20, 30 years ago, right? The fact that today man is sending people to Mars and creating AI, they believe that this bolsters their belief that there is no God. But God is saying he's allowed them to do this. So while they think that there is no God and God is not in this at all, God is saying he's actually in it as much as they are, if not more so. These plots and plans they have would not be successful unless the Lord allowed it. So the fact that they've been successfully able to unleash viruses and illness into the world, it's just like with cancer. This is why there's been an uptick in chemicals in our food. Okay, this is the other thing too. The Lord had me look up what was the number one killer cause in Canada. And again, as always, it shows me the news and data from Canada, right? And the number one killer in Canada is cancer. Out of everything, out of homicides, accidents, suicides, heart attacks, you name it. The number one killer in Canada is cancer. That's what the research and data said, okay? And I've heard this a million times throughout the last 20 years, is they say that they have a cure for cancer, but they won't release it. God is saying that's half right. That's half right, okay? It's not that they can't technically cure cancer. They probably can, because I mean, they have cures and different things for diseases today that have only been around. I mean, they came up with a COVID vaccine in 6 months, but yet cancer has been killing people for like 5 decades and they don't have anything in place, and yes, we've made some advancements in cancer help and assistance, right? We have, but the biggest go-to for the medical team when you have cancer is they want you to either go to chemotherapy or radiation. And did you know, whether you knew this or not, but this is what God's telling me, did you know that a lot of times it's not even the cancer that kills that patient, it was actually the chemotherapy and or the radiation? So the supposed cure was the actual thing that killed the person, not the cancer. But because we rely on man, because we don't believe in God, there's man who doesn't believe in God, so he creates these things in the first place, and then shows them off and presents them to another man who doesn't believe in God either. And so because that first man and that second man trust more in man than they do God, the first man says, I'm not God, but I can play God. Take this and do this and have this chemotherapy and radiation. This will kill your cancer and help you live and cure you. And then, but really you just need God. But that man doesn't believe in God. He believes in himself and he believes in science, right? And then you have the patient man with the cancer who says, you're right, I trust you. You're a doctor. You know everything. I'll take whatever medication you give me. I'll do whatever treatment and test and surgery you give me. I trust you. I believe in science too. I also don't believe in God. We have that in common. We don't believe in God. We believe in man, each other, and we believe in science. So therefore, I'm your guinea pig. Do what you like with me. And because this doctor comes in the name of saving you, curing you, protecting you, this other man says, I'll do whatever you say. And so this doctor says, okay, we'll take this chemotherapy and radiation. Why are we still offering chemotherapy and radiation for cancer? Treatments that they were offering to cancer patients 30, 40 years ago. It's 2025. We're sending people to Mars. We're creating AI. Why are we still giving a supposed treatment for cancer that we were giving people in the 80s? Right? This is the reason why, is because it's a facade. They come off to you in the name of, I'm here to save you and help you. I'm a doctor. I've been a doctor for 20 years. I've done cancer research for the last 10. You take this chemotherapy and this radiation, take this pill, do this, do that, this test, that test. All of the supposed cure, the testing, the pills, the medications, the surgeries, all that is everything that is designed to actually speed up the process or take that person out. And when that patient is sometimes cured from cancer, that science and that doctor takes the credit and says, see, I'm a very good doctor. I cured so-and-so's cancer. I told you these treatments were successful. I told you chemotherapy and radiation is your best bet. God is saying he's the one who cured that cancer. He cured it. He allowed the patient to receive the chemotherapy and radiation. He allowed the doctor to administer chemotherapy and radiation and recommend it. He did all of that. But when that patient died from the cancer, God did it. And when that patient survives the cancer and goes into remission, God did it. God did it all. So man A didn't believe in God but believed in himself and his team and came up with all of this. That was God. Behind the scenes, whether this person realized it or not. The fact that the patient took the treatment in the first place and passed away down the road, that was God. The fact that the patient took the treatment and survived it and beat it, that was God. God played in the whole thing. Man A and man B. And so this is the thing, is God is saying that man has spent the last 20 years, well, even longer, but specifically, the Lord is showing me the last 20 years very concerned, especially 10 years ago, at trying to stop the birth rate and bolster up the death rate so that we could try and thin out the population. And there are people that have picked up onto this, and they've made announcements of it, and they've planted the seed. And so because people have become aware that this is man playing God and trying to uptick things intentionally and on purpose to basically, direct and control population, whether it thrives or goes, increases or decreases, okay? Man has had to be very creative and strategic as to how they can go about this. Because God is saying that man doesn't believe in God, so man says, I'm so scared about population. There's too many births and not enough deaths. I have a plan. Let's create this virus called COVID and put it out. We will release it. We will use a facade and say it came from an animal or it came from this weird area somewhere else in the world, like China, Africa, some other scapegoat, so that people in the first world countries like Canada, US, and UK can't really, they can't know any different, okay? Because you and I don't know what happens in China, right? So this is why they do this. Then they're the ones that leak it out, no different than how they could leak out anything else. I've seen it before where they've talked about it years ago, where they have laboratories that have, I can't remember what it's called, but it's where they have all the viruses and diseases put away. And so at any given moment, at any time in these laboratories, they can create something, they can release something. They have they have like the Black Plague, anthrax, all of it, like COVID, swine flu, and they create these things and they try to make them resistant to antibiotics and resistant to treatment and things, so that when someone gets sick and they go to the doctor for treatment, that they can't get help, right? Even maybe saying that someone takes a medication and they think they're taking a medication and in actuality they're taking a placebo. Because I'm going to be frank and honest, they want you to DIE. They do. And it's because they're so fearful and concerned about this surge in population happening because of what was going on in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And so if that happens to you where you get sick, God allowed it. if you beat the sickness and you're cured, whatever it may be, or they come up with a treatment option that actually works, God allowed it. If you do everything the doctor says and you survive, God allowed it. If you do everything the doctor says and you pass away, God allowed it. But man is taking credit for all of this. And so here we are today in 2025, and sure enough, the Lord was having me look at the data. Birth rates have went down drastically. Their little plan that they created and concocted 15, 20 years ago is working. It's working. There's either the deaths are on trend or they've increased and the births have went down. So it used to be for every 1,000 births, there was 500 deaths, and they were concerned, okay? Now there's like the same 500 deaths or maybe even 1,000 deaths and only 500 births. So either 500 births, 500 deaths, or now it's switched tables and now it's 1,000 deaths and 500 births. And now they're happy. They're like, yes, it's working. And so they believe that because they effectively increase the cost of living and all this kind of stuff and are manipulating and playing with certain elements and things that cause people to get into positions where they get pregnant, right? This is also why they've allowed abortions. This is why abortions are like allowed, and only recently in the last like 2 years have they started to prohibit and put barriers and boundaries on abortions. But up until like 5, 10, 15 years ago, you could get them anywhere. They were available anywhere. They even came up with a pill that a woman could take to stop and terminate the pregnancy. That's how simple it became. That you could just swallow one pill and terminate the pregnancy. I'm not kidding. This is how the Lord was showing it to me. Okay? Now, again, I'm not trying to offend anyone as usual. I'm just speaking facts here and I'm talking on behalf of the Lord. This was the plan that they concocted 10, 15, 20 years ago. Was they thought, well, it's very easy. Okay? All we have to do is come up with ways to make it easy to terminate pregnancies, push for birth control, Depo-Provera, things like this, all different types of birth control. And of course, you got to be old enough to remember, because I'm going back to basically between 2005 and 2010, or even 2000 and 2010. So it was hot off the heels of the 80s, 90s, early 2000s when people were, right, when we had this explosion in birth rates. And man got scared and concerned because they don't believe in God. If there was birth rates in the 80s, 90s, 2000s exploding, God decided that. If there was an uptick in births and a decline in deaths, God decided that. He wanted to overpopulate the earth. Just like if there's an explosion in deaths and a decline in births, as we have right now today, more or less, the data showing, then God allowed that. He decided that. And because God's telling me the scripture right now, he will give and he will take away. God opens doors man can't close, and he shuts doors man can't open. God decides what happens. And this is why the scripture says God will shut doors that man can't open, and God will open doors that man can't shut. That's why the scripture talks about God and man, showing exactly what I'm talking about here, is that man may say, I want to, basically kill everybody and bring this population way down, and I'm going to do this through disease and poverty and addiction and crime and homicide and things like that. And if God says, I'll allow it to a point, then it'll happen. But when God says, that's enough, and he shuts the door, and man says, no, that's not enough. I went and researched, I plotted my scientific data. It's not enough. It's not enough. God says, I've shut the door. Man can't open it. Man can only open a door that God allows man to open. And man cannot shut a door that God allows to be shut or to be open. You know what I'm saying, right? Man thinks that when God shuts a door, they can open it, and that when God opens a door, they can shut it. Man does not decide that. And if for a limited time man opened a door and was successful with it, even if it seems like it's kind of, out there, then God allowed that. And vice versa to if a man shuts a door. So if man says, I don't want any more births, I want all deaths, and God says, I'll allow it for 2 years, and then that's it. That's the cap. Then it'll happen for 2 years. And when man says, I want this to happen for 5 years, once we've reached 2 years, God shuts that door and says, no more. And then man's trying to do it and it's not working. This is why when COVID was first released, there were deaths from it. But if you notice, they're coming out with all these different forms of COVID and stuff, and it's kind of petered out and ran its course, right? Yeah, that's because God allowed it for a limited time only. You guys don't understand. God has shown me this. They wanted to kill so many people with COVID. They wanted to take out millions. That was the big grand plan. But they were only successfully able to take out thousands. And they've been pushing it ever since. This is why we saw strain 1, strain 2. It's mutated, folks. Now we're on, come get this vaccine. They were also trying to kill people with the vaccine. God said no. So now they're trying to release other things. There's so many, you guys think it's bad. You guys think it's bad, and it is, right? But it would be so much worse. What man wants to do is go 99 out of 100, but God has only allowed man to achieve 50 out of 100. And if in some areas man has only achieved 20 out of 100 when they wanted to go 99, that's because of God. In other areas, man only wanted to go 50 and God let them go 80 or 90. That was because of God. And so man has this obsession with trying to play God. And because they've been successful in certain areas, like I said, creating a false baby in a false womb, they assume that if we can choose life, then we can choose death. And so man wants to go and just basically shoot off a KILL switch and shut everything down. But the reason it's not happening is because God's not letting them. It's not because they're good people or they feel bad or they're sensitive. No. If anything, they're actually so corrupt and wicked that they would have done it last year. The only reason it hasn't happened is because God hasn't let it. And if it does happen next year, it's because God allowed it. Because when God shuts a door, man can't open it. If God says you are not going to release A, B, C, then man can't do it. If God says you're not going to repopulate the world or repopulate Mars with test tube babies, then you're not going to do it. But if God says, sure, it's 2030, yeah, I guess you can populate the earth with test tube babies now, then God will open the door and allow it. You guys have no idea the things that man wants to do, how much they want to play God, how much they want to manipulate and play with people today, with birth rates, death rates, what they want to do. The only reason why we've seen a slight increase here, there, and everywhere is because God allowed that to happen. But there's so many things that they want to do, and God has stopped it. Because they're trying to open doors that God already shut and shut doors that God already opened. If God says, I want to repopulate the world now and I want to do it the normal old-fashioned way, then that's what's going to happen. Despite their best efforts to try to promote abortion or to promote this, that, and the third. And so God agrees that we did get a little too overpopulated hot off the heels of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And because of that, God did allow there to be STDs. Because HIV and other STDs stopped people from being sexual. Not all, obviously, right? But to a degree. But because God doesn't want to stop people from being sexual completely, condoms and contraceptives were created as well. You see how there's the good, there's the duality, the good and the bad. There's STDs and things like this and date rape drug and all this different stuff that makes it so that people don't go and hook up with each other. The hookup culture was alive and well for some time. That's because God wanted to repopulate the world, okay? But then he needed to stop it. So therefore it was stopped by people getting addictions from their clubbing lifestyles, right? From people suffering adverse effects, like an uptick in homicides and SAs and things like this. Women getting their drinks poisoned and things. And also the cost of living going up, so people can't afford it anymore. And then there's the fear and scare of STDs. And some of them are lifelong, right? But at the same time, God doesn't want people to necessarily perish from those STDs, so then he creates treatments and cures and, assistance and things. It was just enough to allow a population surge, but when God says that's enough, we have to cap it off now, God will come up with just as creative ways to cap it off as he came up with to allow it in the first place. So when they released COVID, this was their big grand plan. The Lord allowed them to do it because we were having a huge, population surge. Like there was more people than needed, right? And so God allowed cancer, COVID, accidents, homicides, suicides. He allowed these things. He worked in tandem with them, whether they realize it or not, whether they believe in him or not. That's what he did, because he wanted to eradicate some of the population. It's just a part of life. The Bible talks all about this. I mean, we have Judas, who took himself out, right? We have Saul, who was killed in battle. Same with Uriah. We have Cain, who took out Abel. We have Moses, who killed that Hebrew man, okay? The Bible talks about this. The Bible talks about how Lazarus was dead and then brought back to life. Sicknesses, there's leprosy, right? And I could go on and on and on. Poverty, etc. All these things were in biblical days. And so this is the thing, is God knows what he's doing. So God has always been in control from the beginning of Genesis all the way up until the moment I'm speaking these words. He'll be in control tomorrow and any day after that. Man doesn't control anything. If it appears as though they do, it's because God has allowed whatever that they concocted and created to come out successful, so that it has them continue believing that and doing such things. But if God is not in it or for it, it won't happen. So if you were successfully able to create life in a incubator or a test tube or create a false womb, God allowed that. If you were able to successfully release COVID and take thousands of people out, God allowed that. If your big grand plan is to spend the last 5 years raising the cost of living so high that it causes people to choose to not want to bring life into the world or be as loose with things, like as lax, as lax with willy-nilly with what they do, then that's God deciding that. Because he had already allowed a population surge. So these scientists and mathematicians and such are not wrong. The data did plot correctly how it was reflected, yes. Yes, they did see an uptick increase in population of living versus death, mortality rate, the Lord is saying, hallelujah. Living versus death, they did. But God wasn't too concerned, because perhaps he wanted there to be a surge in population in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. But in 2005, 2010, God said, that's enough. And so he then all of a sudden we had an uptick in deaths. And so we're seeing this. The proof is in the pudding. We're not stupid either. Us fellow man that are living our day-to-day lives. We see this it and we blame them. We know that there's people purposely playing around and trying to, it all connects. All the dots connect to make a picture. We know that. But we've been chalking it up to like corruption and evil and greed. And it is those things. And the reason why it is corruption, evil, and greed is because they don't believe in God. They believe in themselves. They believe in their fellow man. They believe in science, things like that. And what the 20-year-long research and data shows them, and they go off of that. But what they don't realize is, just like God could have stopped Cain from killing Abel in the early days, he didn't. Same with Moses with that Hebrew man, Same with David with getting Uriah taken out in battle. He could have stepped in, just like he had Jesus step in with Lazarus. He chose not to. Because God knows it's not man's design to create life and give death. That is God's plan. God gives life and gives death. And so if God feels like our population is too high, he will take people out. Even if it looks like he uses man to do the work for him. but it's God doing it. And if God feels that we need to, surge the population, then he will do that too. He will put it in man's mind to go find woman and woman's mind to receive man, even if it's through a one-night stand. This is why I say God makes no mistakes. When man's at club and is drunk and woman's at club and gets drunk and they make foolish decisions, foolhardy to be intimate, and she gets pregnant, that wasn't a mistake. Man calls that a mistake, but not God. It's no less or more of a mistake than when Tom and Jane are married and they've been married for 5 years trying for a baby and they finally get pregnant with twins. We call scenario A a mistake and scenario B God. But God says, I created life in both circumstances, both A and B. Yes, technically A wasn't done in the way that I wanted it to be, but if I want every single person to get married and have kids the correct way, the population will be low. And that's why the population was low in the 50s, 60s, 70s, is because for the most part, people were doing it the right way. This is why God allowed people in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s to go be loose and lax and foolhardy. He allowed it because it created a population surge, which was what he wanted at the time. But when 2005, 2010 came and we are 30 years into being, this population boom, God says, okay, I'm going to cap it off now. And that is when he allowed man to go behind closed doors and have this big corrupt agenda plan to come up with this and come up with that. And I know if we raise the cost of living, it'll deter people from having children. Correct, it did. I know if we release viruses and we say that it came from this, it'll cause mass deaths. And then we can take out people by the masses. Instead of waiting for individual heart attacks and individual car accidents, we can just, we have to take out thousands to lessen our carbon footprint and the pollution so that we can save the world as fast as we can, because we are seeing from the data on the sidelines that the polar ice caps are melting and the waters are drying up, and it's because the sun is closer to us than ever and the world is heated up, the Earth's core is heated up by a whole degree, scientific this, scientific that. We learned about it in school, the mantle, the crust, all the parts of the Earth, the planets, all God, he knows, right? He knows. And so this is the thing, is because man doesn't believe in God, they push science on us, on each other, on our children. And they do this on purpose to maintain the momentum. But if our world is a degree hotter, God allowed that. If our time is speeding up, God allowed that. God can turn around tomorrow and cool the earth down by 5 degrees if he wants. He can go and slow the world down tomorrow, by 5 days if he wants. If God wants the world to have 1 trillion people, then we will. If God wants life on Mars or Saturn or Pluto, we will. God will decide these things, not man, right? And so anyways, this is pretty much the gist of the message, so I'm going to wrap it up here. But that's the revelation and download that the Lord was giving me today. And to be honest with you all, the Lord has given me that information in the past too. We're in 2025, right around 2021, the Lord was telling me that the whole COVID thing, because to me it just seemed like such a conspiracy and such a facade, right? And it was. Those of us that believed that are not wrong. It's only those that don't believe in God and believe in man and science and doctors and research and all this other stuff that believed whatever man told them. But God is doing a new thing, and he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing with this earth and with other planets and everything, and with humans and population, birth rates, death rates. He knows what to do. This isn't his first time. You know what I mean? And if man is able to experiment and play God and play and manipulate this and play and manipulate that, and it's successful, that's because God allowed that to happen. And so yes, you're correct, chosen ones. And this is another reason why you're chosen, is because you're one of the first ones to see this for what it was. You're probably one of the first ones. I know I was one of the first ones in my family to see through the veil. And because I saw through the veil, I was considered crazy and a nuisance and a rebel and just trying to um, be, like different and be rogue and all this other stuff. And it wasn't that at all. It's just that I saw it for what it was, right? And I'm sure you can relate with that, chosen one. And there's so many of us that can see it. There's some of us on the planet that don't see it. Some of us that still believe that cancer is just a part of life and that they don't have any ways to treat it, and that if the doctor says take chemo and radiation, those are your best bets, and that man has your betterment in mind, and they want what's best for you and all this. No, they don't. Maybe 50 years ago when the world was more so normal, but not today. Today they have an agenda, and it is to try to stop birth rates and slow them down anyway, and speed up death rates to try to depopulate the world. And they have done this through very strategic, organized methods, and they just explain everything away. When we see virus, COVID coming around and other things, we say, like, okay, well, why is measles here? We eradicated that in the 70s. Oh, I know, but people aren't getting vaccinated. And they're not getting vaccinated because they're fearful of vaccinations because of COVID. Well, why was there COVID? Oh, well, because, somewhere in China, this happened and that happened. Just like they tried to say that I forget the West Nile virus is caused by a mosquito. Then you had the swine flu, which was caused by pork. Then you have the bird flu, which is caused by eggs. I can't even remember it all, right? Then you had H1N1 that was caused by something else. They have been coming out with, in the last 20 years, I think there's like 20 different viruses and things that they've created. And yes, they were successful at taking some people out. And we say, well, it's because they were elderly or they were a baby or their immune system wasn't developed. Well, partially, but it was mostly because God decided that was that person's time, that their time was up. And had it have not been SARS or H1N1 or COVID that took them out, it was going to be something else. And so then man goes back to lab and they high five and they say, look how many people we successfully took out with this. And we have them, for the most part, the masses believing that this was just accidental, that this just came out of nowhere, just like HIV or anything else, or cancer. No, it's because of God, okay? And the reason why we have cancer, too, is because this is why you say to yourself, well, why are they putting so many chemicals in our food? Why? Because they cause cancer. And then if the cancer doesn't take you out, then the treatment plan will. And even if you beat your cancer for 6 months or a year or something, and then you get taken out, or sometimes it goes into remission and comes back, it's because of what you're exposed to in our day-to-day world. But if God decides that you're going to live till you're 99 years old, and that's what God decides for you, then they can put all the chemicals they want in your food. They can put all the pollution in your face. You could have measles, COVID, and swine flu all on the same day. You're going to make it to 99 years old. And there's nothing they can do about it. And if at 66 you get into a car accident and you get taken out, that's because God decided that was what was in your plan. Man does not decide anything without God. If God says it's time to shut the door on this person's life, and man says, no, we're going to do these life-saving methods and treatments. If God says, no, I'm shutting the door on this person's life next week, then that door will be shut and no man can open it. And vice versa, if man says, I'm going to take this person out, they have cancer, I'm going to give them this treatment plan and all this, and then by this time next year, they'll be gone. God will miraculously, despite the doctor's report, go and shut the door on that doctor's plan and say, no, I've decided that this person's going to live another 30 years, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and open the door on healing. And this is why doctors are blown away every day, because there's patients that they gave a clean bill of health to that take a turn for the worst. That was God. And then vice versa, there's patients that they say you're on death's door, say your last goodbyes, and they make a miraculous full recovery. Because no matter how advanced our efforts are in science or the medical field, man cannot play God. And if it appears to that man or to yourself as an onlooker or a patient that man was successful at playing God, that's because God allowed that man to be successful at appearing at playing God. Everything that happens on our planet, good, bad, or ugly, God has allowed it. Even if we're making fake babies, he's allowed it. If we're trying to go to other planets, he's allowed it. If we're creating weird ways to kill people off and for people to die, God's allowed it. And man doesn't need to worry about what's going on with the earth. God knows what he's doing. Yes, the polar ice caps are melting. Then God's allowing that. Yes, the earth has heated up a whole degree. Yes, the Lord's allowing it. Yes, we're closer to the sun now. The time is speeding up, all of this. More natural disasters. The Lord is allowing it. And so man needs to understand these things, is that there's nothing man can do without God's allowance and authorization, no matter good, bad, or ugly, what it may be. And that we don't need to worry about certain things, population control, birth rates, death rates, pollution, the earth, all this stuff. God's got this. He's been in this business for thousands of years. He's the longest living superior power on this earth. There is no human on this planet that has outlived God. And not only that, God created you, me, and them. And the Bible talks about this extensively, is that no matter how smart man may be, how wise they may be, they will never, ever outsmart God. They'll never be smarter than God. They'll never know more than God. They'll never outperform God. And that if man says, I want this, and God says, I want that too, then that'll happen. If man says, I don't want this, and God says, I don't want that either, then it won't happen. And vice versa. If man says, I want this, and God says, well, I don't, then it's not going to happen. And if man says, I don't want this, and God says, well, you know what, I do, then it will happen. God has the final say. And the sooner that mankind can wake up and realize this, the sooner that our world will be a better place. Because as long as man walks around thinking that they're the superior being, that they know more and can do more, and that they have so much control and power in their hands that they can control and determine sicknesses and viruses and treatments and whether you live or die, and play and manipulate here and do this and do that, it's what's causing problems, is what it is, right? But that's all part of the whole point. That's the part, this is prophecy playing out as we speak. So anyways, I'm going to leave this message here. Very insightful word. As always, I know that this message will find the right ones in the Lord's right and perfect timing. For those of you that think that it's crazy or doesn't make sense, this message was not for you at this time. It may be for you at a later date when you've awakened and you can understand and see things from a higher perspective, okay? For those of you that are unawakened, if you come across this message, it won't make sense to you and it'll probably offend you. For those of you that are awakened, this message will make sense to you, and you will probably relate to a lot of the things said in this message, because the Lord has probably already revealed such things to you already at this time. For some of you, this message is a right now word. For others of you, this is a message that will make more sense to you in the future, after the Lord has awakened you and allowed you to see things in a proper perspective, okay? But don't go shooting the messenger just because you don't understand or you don't agree with it. It is what it is regardless. It's a word from the Lord. It's not for you at this time. And or you have a Jezebel or religious spirit, and we know how that goes. That needs to be, repented for and taken back to God. So, as always, I will leave this message here. I hope it finds you well. Take care, and God bless.